All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show. It's just me here today, broadcasting from this weird room that Nick usually does the shows from. That's why I have this black background. It looks very odd, but whatever. Kind of an interesting slate tonight. I think it's a really good one for offense, and it's a pretty tough one for pitching. So we'll start with pitching because that's going to be the most difficult thing to figure out. We have one clear-cut choice that seemed very clear-cut yesterday. I'm not so sure about it now. Zach Greinke has been really good this year despite reduced velocity. I sort of buy into him being good with 90 mile per hour fastball just because he was throwing only 91 last year. He was really good. He throws a ton of really good off-speed pitches. Greinke mixes up his pitches as good as anyone. Has as good a command as anyone. So I'd sort of buy into Greinke being really good despite an 89 per hour fastball. And his price is $10,600. It's hard to say if this is an easy matchup because we still don't really know what the impact of the So this game is in Arizona and the roof is open, which last year would be one of the more favorable hitting conditions in all of baseball. This year, we're not as sure. I still think this is going to play like a hitter's park tonight, but the Giants' offense kind of just mediocre. They're a right-hand dominant offense, so it's easier for a right-handed pitcher. We don't actually have their lineup out yet, but Longoria has been dealing with an injury, so maybe he sits, even though he played last night. Definitely some concern there against the Giants. So I don't know, it's kind of just the best of mediocre choices. But if there's someone to pay up for tonight, I think it's Greinke over Jameson Taillon. Matchup comparable. I think Greinke's just a better pitcher than Taillon, who, even though he's a really highly touted prospect, he hasn't generated a lot of strikeouts this year. Most notably in his last game against the Marlins, I think it was only 2 strikeouts that he had. So it's Greinke for me. I think this isn't a great slate, but Greinke should be in most of your lineups. Could be the same thing as last night where it's worth having leverage stacks against him. So I would say I'll probably use Greinke about 90% and then have 10% of lineups where there are Giants stacks because I just don't really like any of the other pitching choices that much. So the other guys to mix in, we've got Jake Arrieta, really underpriced, but he's also just been really awful, so maybe he's not underpriced. Arrieta's velocity is down to start the year, over a mile per hour. And he wasn't particularly good last year, although he was kind of just average 3.53 ERA, but his peripherals were worse than that. A lot worse than when he was a Cy Young candidate in 2015 and when he was really good in 2014. So Arrieta was pitching a little bit worse in 2016 and was kind of just mediocre last year. If he's worse this year, then instead of it being a bargain for him, I think it still just becomes like a fair price. But it should be a favorable pitching environment tonight. Philly's normally a hitter's park, but the wind is blowing in pretty strongly, and the Pirates' offense is not that good. The lineup is out. I mean, it kind of just looks like the normal lineup. So I'll call this a slightly positive matchup at home for Arrieta. 7,600 feels a little too low for him, but I don't think it's a great option. So I would use some Arrieta, but not a ton of him. I don't really have too much interest in stacking against him either because of the weather. 15 to 20 mile per hour winds blowing in from left center field. So not a lot of upside against him. I just think this could be a game where Arrieta runs up his pitch count because his control is kind of just all over the place, walks some batters, doesn't pitch very deep into the game. And it could still be like a 4-3 game, but neither side really scores a ton of points. That's kind of how I see it playing out. Obviously, Arrieta could do really well. He could get lit up. I think both options are worth playing for. But if I had a lean here, I'd rather use Arrieta than use the Pirates offense. So I won't put Arrieta in half my lineups or anything, but I definitely want a decent amount of exposure to him. There aren't really great pitching choices beyond that. 11,100 for Taillon is just so expensive. He probably has the second highest expected output after Greinke, but that's just so much to pay for him. So I don't think I'm going there unless, I mean, it's a cheap stack where you can really fit him. Maybe if you're stacking the Pirates, use Taillon for the correlation, but not much interest there just because the price is so high. After that, it gets really rough. Like the Mets-Braves game, I'll get to it for offense. Those pitchers are awful. Matt Harvey is not good. He hasn't been good in quite some time, and I'm not buying into any early season success, which he really isn't even having anyway. He had, I think, he had one good start, and it was a fairly lucky start where just hard hit balls were going at everyone. So I'll just pull up his numbers really quick. But Matt Wisler on the other side for the Braves, not a good prospect, kind of just a non-prospect who has had some major league appearances, but hasn't done anything with that. He's bad. So this is a game for offense, not for pitching. Harvey's peripherals, 7.8 Ks per nine, 1.8 walks per nine, look decent so far, but he's giving a ton of homers. His hard hit percentage is at 40%, and the swinging strikes are only at 8.7%. So I do think Harvey will be better than last year, where he has 6.70 ERA last year. He's going to have to be better than last year, but I don't think he'll be better by that much. Like, I still think he's a well below average starting pitcher. And his velocity is actually down this year compared to last year, around 92 compared to last year when he was at 94. So not good signs for Harvey. Even at 6,300, I wouldn't consider him. Even if Freddie Freeman wasn't in the lineup, which he is, I probably still wouldn't be considering Matt Harvey. So that's a complete fade. And yeah, this is a game for offense, so I'll get to that soon. Other pitchers to look at, I think there's some interest for both sides of the Red Sox-Angels game. We have two high strikeout, high walk guys. Both are high variance pitchers in Eduardo Rodriguez and Nick Tropiano. Rodriguez is probably better, but Tropiano is cheaper. So if there's anyone to roster that's cheap, it's Tropiano for me. Rodriguez, I probably prefer Arrieta, but he's worth considering also. So those are kind of the fringe options after Greinke and I guess Arrieta. Dylan Peters is really bad, but the Brewers strike out a lot, and they are a pretty left-hand heavy offense generally. Looking at the lineup for tonight, though, they do have a lot of righties in there. But if the Brewers are going to be really chalky, which I think they will be, maybe there's some leverage for Dylan Peters, even though he's bad, just because the Brewers strike out a lot and he could have a miraculously good game. I mean, random things happen all the time. So Peters would be someone to mix in a very small amount. I'd prefer Tropiano. I prefer Rodriguez, definitely Arrieta, and of course Greinke. But yeah, no strong convictions for pitching on this slate. And that probably covers pitching. I think that's named everyone there. So moving on to offense. The game with the strongest potential for run scoring is that Mets-Braves game. Both teams are kind of just reasonably priced. So Ender Inciarte has been awful this year. He's kind of just but he's cheap batting leadoff, so I like him. And then Albies and Freeman have been good. And then the rest of the Braves are really cheap. I mean, I'm fine with Nick Markakis. Like I said last night with Kurt Suzuki, I don't really like him righty versus righty, but Harvey's certainly bad enough where I would include him. The priority play, though, after the first three guys in the Braves order, it's definitely Preston Tucker. He's really cheap. He's hit some homers this year. Clearly has power. Maybe isn't that good of a hitter, but a power lefty against Matt Harvey for 2,800. I mean, that's worth having. I think he's a good plug. I think he's worth having in game stacks. So I like Tucker a lot. And then on the Mets side, I probably prefer the Braves, and it's just because of the pricing. So the Mets are a little expensive. Conforto's 4,800. Cespedes is only 4,200 though. So even against a righty, I like Cespedes more than Conforto. And then Jay Bruce, 3,900 is fine, but it's a little expensive for Asdrubal and for Frazier. So I definitely like them, but I just prefer the Braves side a little. So in terms of exposure, I definitely would want to have both of those teams, but lean towards the Braves. Those are my first and second favorite offenses, though. And then beyond that, I mean, having a little bit of chance against Greinke, I think that makes sense as a leverage strategy because Greinke should be the most popular pitcher. Him and Arrieta, that's definitely the chalk tonight. I think Greinke probably will have a little bit more ownership than Arrieta. Both are definitely going to be among the chalkiest pitchers. I think they both could be over 50% owned. So at the same time, maybe stacking the Pirates makes some sense just from an ownership standpoint. But I've kind of flip-flopped here. I thought that the Pirates were a better leverage play last night. Looking at it now, I think the Giants are a better leverage play because of the hitting conditions in Arizona compared to the hitting conditions in Philly, even though Zach Greinke is a much better pitcher than Jake Arrieta. Other offenses with high expected output, we have the Diamondbacks at home against Ty Block. That's obviously a good spot, but they're pretty pricey. So I think I'm looking more to the Diamondbacks for plugs. Goldschmidt and Pollock, if you can fit them, definitely like those two. But assuming you can't fit them, Kettle Marte batting second, 3,300. That's usually where he hits. The lineup's not actually out yet. But Chris Owings probably will play against the lefty. He's pretty cheap. Nick Ahmed. I mean, it's not a good lineup at the bottom of the order, but they do some right-handed bats. So I'm fine with them. But I definitely prefer the Mets and the Braves to the Diamondbacks just because of the pricing. And I think the pitching is worse. Like Ty Block is not good, but Matt Wisler and Matt Harvey are worse than Ty Block. But Diamondbacks do have the open roof in Arizona, so favorable hitting environment. They're worth having exposure to too, but maybe just as plus because the stacks for the Mets and Braves I think are the strongest values of the night. I'm probably fading the Brewers to some degree for the ownership, although their prices are pretty low. It's kind of crazy, actually, how cheap this team is for tonight. So Kane, 4,000, Yelich, 3,800, Domingo Santana, 3,000, Shaw's 43. I mean, that's normal. And then we've got Aguilar, Perez, both around 3,000. I didn't realize how cheap they were, so more consideration for the Brewers. I think at higher stakes, that's where most of the ownership will be, is on the Brewers. I don't know. It's kind of hard to figure out what to do with them. This is definitely a good spot, though. Domingo Santana is my favorite Brewers player for tonight, batting third at 3,000. So I would use him as a plug, but I'm not sure how much exposure I'll have to the other moderately priced guys because I do just prefer the Braves and Mets. Dylan Peters seems pretty bad. He wasn't great last year. But I think that Wisler and Harvey are worse than him also. Peters is maybe more in the Ty Block category. So, yeah, again, I think plugs here for sure, but maybe only one or two of them out of 20 lineups, let's say. And then it's probably going to be it aside from this Red Sox-Angels game. So unless anyone has questions, I'll just end with that. This is going to be a short one today. We only have 5 games. All right, so Red Sox-Angels. I hope the Red Sox are chalky tonight because there are just so many spots that are better than them. And the Red Sox have scored a ton of runs the last 2 games. They're very expensive. Nick Tropiano is pretty boom or bust. So I think he could do well. I mean, it could be another 9-run game for the Red Sox. That's certainly possible. But I think it's a bad bet, especially at those prices, and especially with the Mets, Braves, and even the Diamondbacks and Brewers being superior options. I have zero interest in the Red Sox tonight. And at lower stakes, I think because of the quote-unquote hot streak, they could have more ownership than they should have, and hopefully they just don't do very well. The line movement is against this game also. The over-under went from 8.5. It's almost down to 8 now, despite the public betting the over pretty heavily. Not really any line movement as far as the sides of the game. But this favors both pitchers. I still think that the Angels could be a decent contrarian stack just because no one's going to go there. Eduardo Rodriguez is boom or bust also. Mike Trout against the lefty is worth having exposure to. So expensive plugs for an outfielder. I mean, Pollock versus Trout. I think I probably prefer Pollock, but I want some of Trout mixed in there too. Maybe 20 lineups, you have 1 Angel stack because a team with this much upside against a team like the Red Sox where it's a decent starter, but they have a really bad bullpen outside of their closer. The Angels have enormous upside. So I think for maybe even for higher stakes tournaments where people are going to use them even less, the Angels make more sense. But there's certainly going to be low ownership here, and there's a lot of leverage. If Eduardo Rodriguez is popular, which I don't think he will be, but he could be the next most popular pitcher after Greinke and after Arrieta, so maybe. But either way, the Angels should have low ownership. I mean, Trout should be double digits, but the rest of the guys will be very low. So I have some interest there. And then to wrap it up, well, the Marlins against Chase Anderson are really cheap. I like them potentially for leverage if Anderson has ownership too. I guess I keep overlooking him because on the podcast last night, I didn't talk about him at all. I don't think Greg did either, except to say just briefly, we don't like him. His ERA last year was in the 2s. So for this year, it's in the 2s. He's nowhere near that good. He's probably below average. His peripherals are just nowhere close to what his ERA is. And he gives up a lot of fly balls, and he's actually throwing slower this year and giving up even more fly balls, and he's getting less strikeouts. He's just managed to get out of every single jam that he's been in all year. So I certainly like Derek Dietrich. I certainly like Justin Bour as plugs. I'm not sure how I feel about the Marlins as a full stack, though, because the expected output is just higher for some of these other teams. But it's a hitter's environment in Milwaukee, so I think the Marlins are worth considering. So just to quickly rank these options, for me, it's Greinke number 1 at pitcher, Arrieta number 2, and then sort of just a mix of Tropiano, Eduardo Rodriguez, maybe even a little bit of Tyone, maybe Dylan Peters. But it's really Greinke by far the most, and then Arrieta maybe half the lineups after that, and just kind of mix in all these other options. For offense, Mets and Braves, that's the priority, followed sort of closely by the Diamondbacks, then the Brewers, and then I think contrarian options that are worth having a little of would be the Giants, the Angels, the Marlins, and maybe the Pirates, although I don't think I'll go there. No one's going to roster the Phillies tonight. I just don't have interest in them. Tyone's good enough that I don't like the Phillies, and definitely no interest in the Red Sox if they're going to have high ownership, and they're very expensive. So that's going to wrap it up. You can find all of the rest of our stuff at rotopros.com. Thanks for watching as always, and we'll be back tomorrow.